Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to the computer bullet chess championship in 2021-2022. So this tournament is almost over and we know of course the winner, which is always we have the same winner. It's the Stockfish engine, and Stockfish really brutalized this other engine Dragon in the super final. When it comes now to the current standings, it's really brutal what Stockfish does, because Stockfish has something like 350 points more than the Dragon engine, which is really wild. But what I really like about this computer chess championship finals and also in some other tournaments is that these engines have to play, for instance, one particular opening. So maybe they have to play like 20-30 games maybe in the Dragon Sicilian, then they play like 20-30 games in the Queen's Gambit Decline. So if you want to study something, then you just download this particular games, and then you can have really great preparation particular openings. So they have played like more than 2,000 games, which is really wild, and that's why I decided to cover, of course, many great games. What I really liked about this game that I will show you today is the fact that the Stockfish engine pulled off really sick and brutal 150 attack. And the 150 attack you use basically when you play against the modern defense, perch defense, and similar structures. And I used the 150 attack many times, so this was really a perfect game for me to analyze. The only thing that I play against the perch defense or the modern defense is the 150 attack, and I think the 150 attack is really one of the best methods to beat the perch defense or the modern defense, because when you play the 150 attack, you don't break the basic principles in chess. So you develop the knights on the most natural squares, you develop them on knight on f3, here knight to c3, then you develop your bishops on e3 and d3. So you have, I think, a really great setup. And what the cool part, I think it's really one of the coolest part in any openings, is that you have a flexibility. You can calculate queenside, you can calculate kingside. So sometimes your opponent doesn't know where you're going to calculate, and you have really, I think, great opportunities to win the game with the white pieces against this openings, as we said, against the perch defense or the modern defense. So be prepared. This is again simple, sick, brutal Stockfish stuff, but with my most common, my most popular opening, the 150 attack. So here d4 play by Stockfish, we have d6, e4, we have g6. Now we have the so-called perch defense. After move bishop to e3 and bishop to g7, we have now knight to c3. I hope you realize that this knight and the bishop, they're coming on the most natural squares. These are really almost the most optimal squares that you can have for these pieces in the beginning. So that's why I would always recommend you to play maybe not the same, but something similar, in which you have really great flexibility first of all, but also the second most important thing is that you have really great piece development. So here in the continuation, we have now the move c6, we have now h3. This move h3 is a prophylactic move. It can be maybe even avoided. You don't have to play it, but here Stockfish played the move h3 because many times in human level I've seen this particular lines. If you play, for instance, the move knight to f3 immediately, this wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to show you what could be maybe black's idea. Why is black delaying, for instance, some ideas, and plays the move c6. Then you could maybe risk this pin. It's not so dangerous, I think, this method of blacks, but you can face it sometimes, and sometimes it can be unpleasant to play it against, because here after move h3, then you can face bishop to f3 and a queen to f3, something like knight to d7, and I don't know, maybe you can play bishop to d3, but then black is probably going to play the move e5 and try to play sort of a closed game, and hopes that you stay with your bad bishop here on d3. But okay, still white is much better here, but if you want to avoid these types of ideas, here h3 is perfectly fine, and black can never play then afterwards the move bishop to g4. And then in the continuation of the game, the bishop on c8 many times becomes a really bad piece. So we'll come to that bad piece also in the continuation of the game. So here after move h3, we have now b5. b5 is also a very common move in the perch defense, because the move b5, okay, you can avoid it with the move a3, or you can play even the move a4 immediately to really little bit slow down the pace of the game on the queen side, because it's obvious that black has here the advantage on the queen side. But even if you do that, the point of blacks here is not to win the game on the queen side. The point of blacks here is to make you castle king side. So many times when you play the game as white, I'm sorry if I'm bringing you too much theory here, but I think it's very important to know what's going on the board, because if, for instance, black would not have have played the move b5, if black plays something like knight to f6, then you can go into the normal 150 attack and create this queen and bishop battery. And if you castle too early, I think even here knight to f3 and then with bishop to h6 has here, I think, great opportunities for white. And we can play normal ideas h4, h5. We'll try to open then the h file, and with the queen and rook battery, we're trying maybe even to get sort of a checkmate idea here around the square h7. Even e5 is in some occasions the opportunity to deflect then the knight from the defense of the h7 square. So that's why with the move b5, okay, as we said, black is not going to win the game on the queen side. Black is not winning the battle on the queen side, but black is basically preventing you from queen side castling, and that's why this is also very, very important move order when you play the Persian defense. So that's why bishop to d3, normal development, because here after a potential knight to f6, this wasn't also played in the game. You see the cool part about this move bishop to d3 is that after knight to f3 and b4, after knight to e2, still you have a protection of your e4 square, e4 pawn. And then in the continuation of the game, again, we can push the pawn on e5. We can also play then queen to d2, attack the b4 pawn. We can again play queen to d2 and create this bishop and queen battery, and again chase the bishop away from h by playing the move bishop to h6. So again, white is, I think, a great flexibility. So that's why after move bishop to d3 and knight to f3 is going to come, you see white has really a beautiful setup. The knight on f3 is a natural square, the bishop on e3 is on a natural square, bishop to d3 perfectly fine, and also the knight on c3 perfectly fine. So that's what I really like about the 150 attack, the normal setup, which gives you really great opportunities in the game. So here in the continuation, after move bishop to d3, knight to d7, again with the preparation to play the move e5 and simplify the game. So here in the continuation, we have knight to f3, knight to b6, preparing here maybe this knight on c4 move. Again, this move is sort of a idea if you castle too early on the queen side. If you play, for instance, something like queen to d2 and castle queen side, then knight to c4 happens, and after bishop to c4, b takes c4, then the b file could get opened. Although black would have then double pawns here on the c file, but the open b file would give, I think, black here really pleasant game with the support of the dashboard bishop. Then black could have also great counterplays on the queen side. So that's why here after move knight to b6, as we said, the 150 attack is really beautiful because of its flexibility. Castle king side now perfectly fine. So here in the continuation, we have knight to f6, we have queen to d2, and now if you play this idea knight to c4, this is not so powerful because we can take it out immediately. Bishop takes c4, b takes c4, and okay, black could have the fun a little bit on the b file, but actually you can break it immediately with the move b3. Nothing went wrong here. After c takes b3, a takes b3, I still think that white has here a pleasant game. First of all, we can notice that this isolated pawn on the a file will cause down many problems for black. Black will have really problems to defend this pawn, and still in the continuation of the game, we can play something like rook to e1, then maybe queen to e2, and even break again the position with the move e5, or we can go into maybe more positional line with the move d5, or we can play, of course, something like rook to a4, rook to a1, and then simply continue the pressure on the a file. So many again opportunities. I still think really that white is much better. For instance, if you put now this position into an engine, it will give you already 1.5 advantage for white, which is really wild when you have such an advantage in, I don't know, move 10 or something. So so far after move queen to d2, here the dragon engine also decided to castle, so dragon didn't play this knight on c4. So we have rook from f to e1, we have a5, we have e5. Now comes this where it's common breakthrough here from white's perspective against the Perch defense. After move e5, we have a knight to d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, and now bishop to h6. Again a common motif to simply get rid of this very good bishop on g7, because first of all, the bishop is very dangerous on this diagonal. But one other thing is very important to say about this bishop. This bishop is not the only good attacker here from in black's position. It's also a great defender in front of the king, because if, for instance, black plays bishop to h6, then queen to h6 is going to happen. And see now with the move e5, we have deflected this knight from the square h7, and now after move knight to g5 and queen, potential queen to h7, black has again many tactical problems. So from this point on, the game is over. So that's why black can really never take out the bishop on h6. So black is waiting white to take here the bishop on g7, and then after king to g7, maybe black can regroup and hope for the best and maybe can defend this position. So here the continuation, rook to e8. So what's the idea about the rook to e8? Because here the problem is that black wants to play bishop to h8, and this is now the main goal, because what we're trying to do with the move bishop to h8 is then really get out of this potential trades of dark square bishop. Still, then the bishop controls this long diagonal and also defends the g7 square. So this rook to e8 is also a common maneuver to simply get out of the attack of the bishop on h6. As we said, bishop takes h6 for black is not working, queen to h6 is happening, and then the game is over. So here, if you try maybe something else, let's see, knight to b4, if you try maybe to attack the light square bishop, I was really curious what's going to happen if you, for instance, chase the bishop a little bit on d3. You should be also a little bit worried, because white has also great tactical opportunity with the potential rook to e4. This is something that you should not forget when you play the game as black, and of course when you play the game as white. But I think black is missing many times the fact that white can even attack the position even in the center of the board and chase a little bit the position further with the move rook to h4. Because if you play, for instance, something like knight takes d3, c takes d3, and maybe you're trying something like bishop to f5, then this is going to happen. Rook to h4, you see, very dangerous, and now there's not a good way how to defend this position. Bishop takes g7 is going to happen, and then rook to queen to h6, and then follow with queen to h7. So the only way to prevent this is to sacrifice the rook for the exchange, and now after bishop to f8, again white is probably winning the game. So as I said, here after move bishop to h6, you see rook to e4 is also very dangerous move. So that's why here the dragon engine get out of the range. We have now a4 here by Stockfish, we have b4, and now c4 attacking the knight, b takes c3. This is very important now, I think, for black to take, because if you play something like, I don't know, let's go b6 or something, then white is going to lock the position on the queen side. We'll play b3 and we'll have a really firm position on the queen side, and basically on the queen side it's not nothing is going on anymore. So the only attacking possibilities are I think on the king side. So that's why by fixing the pawn structure here on b3 with this great attacking flow here on the king side, again I'm pointing out rook to e4, rook to h4 is going to happen. I think black is simply tactically lost. The knight is too far away from the action. The bishop cannot be included into the game, so that's why here it will be game over, I think, for black. So that's why after c4, b takes c3, b takes c3, and now rook to b8, getting use of the b file. If you try now bishop to h8, it's a little bit too slow, because this is now again the tactic h4. H4 is again a possibility because black's pieces are simply too passive. You see now, even if you try something like bishop to g4 in order to maybe stop this h5 move, h5 would be very dangerous. Then this is going to happen. This is also a tactic that you should be worried about in the 150 attack. So I think in the near future on my YouTube chess channel we'll analyze the 150 attack with great tactical motifs. You see, even e6 here is an opportunity, because after bishop to e6 you get this one, rook to e6, f takes e6, and now h5 is breaking now the position on the king side. This is simply again a tactical lost game. You see the queen is going into the game, the knight is going into the game, even this rook can be included into the attack. So this is something that black should resign. So that's why after b takes c3 we have rook to b8. Here the dragon engine is at least trying to get some kind of an activity here around the square c3. We have rook to c1, knight to c7, trying probably to get also the knight a little bit into the defense, and now here c4 anyway by Stockfish, and now we have rook to b4. And okay, let's stop and evaluate the position. It seems so that black has defended the position, the knight is going into the defense, the knight will come into the game, but now Stockfish pulls off really one of the most brutal moves that I've seen in my life. It's really wild what Stockfish does, because I'm not sure how many of us would even consider the move. Many of us would maybe consider something else. Maybe even this idea h4 h5 comes to my mind. I would play probably this move h4. I'm not sure if it's even good, but Stockfish, of course, the best calculator in chess in the world, plays now really thick, brutal move. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see one of the best moves that you can play here. Maybe consider every move and just for fun try to see maybe now the best continuation for white. It's not even worth to analyze, because as I said, I'm not sure how many of us even would consider the move, because it's such a brutal sick move. So okay. Stockfish played here really incredible d5 move, and you see the knight is protecting the square, the queen is protecting the square, and for potential d takes e5 will have a triple attack around the square d5, but Stockfish plays d5 anyway. Really sick, brutal pawn breakthrough motif, because here what's going to happen if you play, for instance, something like bishop to e5. If you play bishop to e5, this wasn't played in the game, but it's I think the line that we should also here analyze, because then this is going to happen: knight to e5, and then after d takes e5, the problem is after d takes c6, the only way to get your pieces again into the defense is probably to play queen to d6. But now with queen to e3, I think that again black will face many tactical problems. You see, first of all, you have to always protect the g7 square. Also, the e5 pawn is a little bit weak. Even c5 with bishop to c4 are opportunities. So here again, I think black would have a comfortable game, although this is actually the suggested move by my Stockfish engine at home. So my Stockfish engine at home suggests this position. At least black is defending this position somehow, but I'm really not a fan of this position, especially because you gave up your dark square bishop, your powerful dark square bishop finally, and now you see the hole in black's position. It's the weak g7 square. I think a brutal engine like Stockfish will exploit the weakness for sure. So that's why here after move this d5, the dragon engine played something else, played now c takes d5, took now the pawn, we have c takes d5, and now here the dragon engine took with the pawn d takes e5. And okay, here in the continuation, Stockfish plays knight to e5. Again, the dragon engine doesn't want to give up the dark square bishop here for the knight. If you play now something like knight to d5, this wasn't played in the game again, but then you face this tactic: bishop to g7, king to g7, and now bishop to b5 is simply winning the game, because the rook has to move. You have to play rook to f8, and now knight to c6 is simply winning the exchange. And from this point on, of course, black is tactically lost. So you can maybe try queen to d5 instead of knight to d5, but you see now the knight is hanging on c7, again bishop to g7, king to g7, and then rook takes c7 is again simply winning the game for white. So that's why after move knight to e5, the dragon engine tried to get this bishop into the game. Very important move here. As we said, dragon engine had the opportunity to take the pawn with two pieces, but nothing was working. So that's why bishop to b7 was played by the dragon engine, and finally this bishop comes into the game. So you see, in the beginning we said this bishop wasn't good in the game, it was passive for the whole game, but when it came out it was simply too slow, because now Stockfish pulled off again a sick, brutal tactic. So Stockfish played now bishop takes g7 after king to g7. Can you guess maybe now the best next move? I'm not sure again how many of us would even consider it, but it's really again a brutal tactic. Again, pause the video and try to see now the best next move. Okay, here Stockfish played queen to h6, temporarily queen sacrifice, king to h6, and now knight to f7. At least here Stockfish gained the pawn, king to g7, and now knight takes d8. We have here knight takes d5. If you take, of course, here the knight, then of course rook takes e7 or rook takes c7. But now after this one, both of these rooks will come on the 7th rank, and then again black is tactically lost. So here after move knight to d8, we have knight takes d5, knight takes b7, rook takes b7, and now after move bishop to e4, we have now this dangerous pin against the knight, so that's why you have to protect your knight. Rook to d8 was played, bishop to f3, improving a little bit the position of the lightfoot bishop, but also attacking the weak e7 pawn. So here king to f6, we have a rook to c6, we have king to f7, rook to c5, a double attack now against the pawn, but also against the knight, so that's why e6. We have a rook takes a5, and you see now Stockfish has gained the pawn. Stockfish has now a distant pass pawn. Stockfish has now the support of the bishop, and now this rook is very flexible, so it's now completely winning endgame here for white. So rook to c7, rook to a1, very important move to get your rook behind the pawn. This is the so-called Tarash rule, which says you should bring your rook behind your pawn, but when you're playing the game defensively, then you should try to bring your rook behind your enemy pawn. So what black would love to do is, of course, to play something like rook to c3, then rook to a3. Then it would be very hard for white to promote this pawn to queen. But now after move rook to a1, white has a comfortable game. We have rook to d6, rook to b5, now a5, simply pushing the pawn. We have g3, knight to b6. You cannot, of course, take because of these problems on the a file, so that's why Stockfish played king to g2, first, of course, improving all of the pieces into the game. So we have knight to d5, we have rook to a3, very important move to cut off here the potential square for the knight. We have king to e7, and now h4. What Stockfish is again hoping for is maybe to get h5, and then maybe in some occasions to create even another pass pawn here on the king side. So far it's not so easy to make that happen, but if you create maybe one pawn on one side and then you have one pass pawn on the other side, then the position gets a little bit stretched for black's pieces. Then the pieces are not connected, so that's why here Stockfish tried now to use also a little bit this pawn majority sort of the king side. It's not pure pawn majority because of course of the e6 pawn, but if you grab the e6 pawn, then probably it's game over. And that's exactly what Stockfish does. Stockfish will try now the attack here against this e6 pawn. So we have king to f6, we have bishop to e2, the rook to c6. Now a very important move, a6. You see Stockfish is getting more and more towards the potential promotion, because you cannot take, of course, here rook takes a6 is not working because you get this one, and then rook takes d5 here. After e takes d5, then bishop takes a6, and it's of course a completely winning endgame here for white. So after move a6, king to e5, rook to b2, rook to c1, and now bishop to d3. We have rook to c6. You see black doesn't know what to do because the position is really bad here for black. We have rook to b8, getting again behind the pawns. Very important move. Now it's very important maybe to, as we said, attack the e6 pawn. We have rook from a to b3, we have rook to c7, and now bishop to f1, again improving a little bit the position of the bishop. We have king to e5, and now rook to b2, king to d6, and rook to b7, because you don't want to take, of course. Then when that happens, then we have the supported pass pawn. You cannot of course protect the potential promotion on bx, so again it's game over. So that's why after move rook to b7, h6, bishop to d3, attacking the pawn on g6. Here we have g5, h5, king to e5, now bishop to c4. Very cool move, because if you play, of course, rook to c4, you lose the rook, or again if you play rook to b7, then a takes b7 is happening, and we have seen this is not good for black. So that's why king to d4, we have bishop to e2, king to d7, bishop to g4, now king to e5, and now very important move, rook to e2. Finally Stockfish is winning another pawn, because after king to d4 we have rook takes d7, we have rook takes d7, but now bishop to e6 is of course completely winning, because after rook to a7, now even this is going to happen, because there wasn't even a better way. If you try even to hang on to your knight somehow, then bishop rook to d2, then we're trading off, and you have to takes, and here we push the pawn further, and the king cannot catch the pawn anymore, and the queen will come, and it's of course game over. So that's why after move bishop to e6, rook to a7, rook to d2, now Stockfish grabs the pawn. We have rook takes a6, but now bishop to f3, rook to b6, rook to d5. Now Stockfish tried here, of course, to trade off the rooks, simplify the game. That's why dragon got out of the range of the potential trades of rook. So rook to c6, we have rook to g6 attacking the king, king to h7, and now very important move. Now the threat is of course to play something like rook to b6 and then discover the attack and grab the rook. So that's why rook to b4, bishop to f5, we have a rook to b5, g4. Again, the threat is happening now, but now the bishop is supported, of course, so that's why king to h8, and finally Stockfish grabs another pawn. We have king to g7, rook to g6, and Stockfish grabs another pawn. This is of course completely winning. So king, rook to b4, rook to g6, Stockfish pushes the pawn further. Okay, here the dragon engine gave up the rook for the bishop, and Stockfish pushed the pawn further, and here after queen to g7, it was a beautiful checkmate again. So okay, really very wild stuff here by Stockfish. I really liked here the tactical motifs in the 150 attack, really flexible position. Sometimes in the 150 attack, or most of the times, you're going queenside castling, and then you try this queen and bishop battery. Let's go back here to the 150 attack. So many times you're basically going queen to d2 and queenside castling, but as I said, that's the beauty of the 150 attack. First of all, you bring all of your pieces on natural squares, and you have really certain flexibility to go attack the kingside, attack the queenside, and we have seen basically that the Stockfish engine won the game by pushing the pawn in the center. So this was the central breakthrough motif that gave, I think, Stockfish the pleasant game. So as I said, if you want to study something against the Perts or 150 attack, I think this is something worth pardon me, if you want to study against something against the Persian friend or modern friends, use the 150 attack. I think you'll not make a mistake. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more brutal Stockfish games and some other top engine games, check out my commented chess games played by computers, with some more games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, Dragon, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.